Welcome to another episode of Dad Up, everyone. Thank you guys very much for joining me. I'm excited for this conversation today because it's about marriage. And I am a firm believer in, the family, the marriage structure being the solid foundation for raising kids. And so that's why I've asked Tony and Alisa DiLorenzo to be on the podcast with me because they're marriage experts and they go around the country speaking about marriage, and they have an awesome podcast themselves. But I'm going to get into all that with them. But welcome to the show, you guys.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to this conversation because I've been following you guys for a little while and really enjoy your guys' beliefs and the way you guys live together and the way you guys communicate and all those kinds of things. But before we get into all that, for my listeners who don't know who you are, let's learn a little bit more about you guys and about your backgrounds and then how you guys got into really helping others in their marriage.
Yeah. So Elisa and I have been married 27 years. We've known each other 30 years. We met when had just turned 21. Elisa was 19. And then we got married at 23 and 22. We have two children. One's 21 in college. We got a daughter who just graduated from high school who is with us right now, taking a gap year. And you know what? Over those 27 years of marriage, it hasn't all been pretty, as you probably know, Brian. Having been married for many, many years, we've had our ups and downs. We almost got divorced twice in that time frame. We lost a child at 18 weeks, and we've gone through massive debt, how to get ourselves out of it. And even now, having the Top Rated Marriage podcast, we still have our ups and downs, but what we do is we come to the one family, that's our community, and we just share with them open, honestly, and transparently of what marriage is and the goods, the bads, the tough, but also the highs that we can have with one another.
And would you agree with that, Alisa?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's really interesting because about 15, 16 years ago, our marriage was really in a spot where our kids, they were 2 and 5 at the time. We were really good roommates.
Yeah.
We were in the trenches with the kids. We were, getting the tasks done, but the marriage had been really disconnected. And you asked kind of like what our, sort of what the origin story is of what we're doing. And it was in that place of just total dysfunction of just going, is this as good as it gets? Right? Is this what we have to look forward to for the next? I mean, our 18-year-old was 2 at the time, and we're like, do we get divorced now? Do we wait until she turns 18 and goes off to college or figures out what's next for her, or do we get radical? And that was really that line in the sand moment. And as she turned 18 last November, it hit us like time and time again, her senior year, going through all these things, that this would have very likely, if we'd chosen to wait until the kids went to college, this would have been the year that we were going through a divorce. And instead, we decided to get really radical and really intentional and rediscover marriage. And that's really what kind of catapulted us into what we do today.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. So rediscover marriage. So how did you guys, let's just say the first step, what did that look like to you guys?
So we were leading a small group for couples at our church.
Oh, cool.
And we'd been leading this group, and Tony calls me one day. And again, I'm probably in the middle of like laundry or groceries or something because the kids were teeny tiny. And he says, I think we should talk about sex in this small group. I don't think the church talks about sex enough. And here we are, it's a small group, 5 couples. We could totally do this. And I remember Brian looking at the phone and going, honey, we're not having sex. Like, what are we going to talk about? Right? How is this going to go down? Like, what are we? And then I was just a little bit snarky. And I said, if you can find me a book that we can use as a study, right? Some kind of course material, I'll entertain it, right? I'll consider it. And that was the catalyst for everything that came next.
Yeah. And so she said that, and that was like my glimpse of hope. You know what I mean? It was like, I'm an optimist, and I'm like, I love to just go, okay, we can do something. And so that was my glimpse. And I had another business at the time, a trade that I would be driving around San Diego where we had lived. And I was like, okay, there's a Christian bookstore down the street from where I was. I finished the job I was on, and I had like some time in between. So I ran there. I was like, I'm going to find a book. And I get into like the marriage relationship section. I'm just scouring these books. And we found this book called Intimacy Reignited. Intimacy Ignited. That's right. And I was like, Alisa, I found the book. And so brought it home. We looked through it. And then a few days later, maybe it was, some friends of ours, their children were going to be on local TV. They're doing like some beach tennis thing, one of the segments. Well, the segment after it was about these two couples who had done sex challenges. Mm-hmm. So in my mind, I'm like, we're going to watch this too. Like, we're not going to turn this off yet. And so we're watching this segment, and it's these two couples who, one, she had given her husband 365 days of sex for his 40th birthday. Another couple did 101 days straight. And so as we're watching this, my mind's turning again. Like, and I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, we're going to do a small group study. Mm-hmm. It's going to be 8 weeks, 60 days. And so I remember as that segment was ending, I looked at Elise and I said, why don't you and I, for the duration of this small group study, not the folks in it, but you and I, why don't we do a 60-day sex challenge?
And I said, no. Like, I'm not entertaining this. We have a 2 and a 5-year-old. Like, I don't want to talk about it. I got up out of bed because we were watching it in bed. And I went to the bathroom, Bryan, and I just put on a face mask. I was like, I came back to bed. I'm like, we're just like,
but I just want to say, she goes to the bathroom, and in my mind, I'm like, she said no, but I was still like, all right, well, again, we were dysfunctional at this point in time. 11 years into our marriage, mm-hmm. pretty much roommate syndrome really happening. I mean, it was like 2 ships passing in the night most of the time. But I was hopeful, like, all right, well, maybe tonight at least. And so she comes back out of the bathroom literally with like this green avocado face mask, which I never seen her have one on
before
prior
or
to that
since.
or since. So like, what are you doing?
Which is really funny because I'm not a face mask girl, but clearly I had something under the bathroom sink. And so that night we just kind of went to bed in a really just kind of tense spot. Mm-hmm. And the next morning, very much my come to Jesus moment. I was standing in my garage with a basket full of laundry, and I heard what I believed to be the voice of God saying, if you're not willing to try, then your marriage is over. And I started having this wrestle moment, like, God, I don't think this is the solution. I don't think this is what we're supposed to, like, really, God, like, you want me to have sex with me? And it was just this sense of, it wasn't about the sex. He's like, if you're not willing to try, like, he's not asking you to give up anything. Mm-hmm. He's asking you to invest in this relationship, to make him a priority, to see what happens when the marriage is first, not the kids, not the tasks, not anything else. And so Tony comes home from work that day, we have a conversation, and we end up completing 40 out of 60 days. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, Bryan, will hear that story and go, oh my gosh, it was all about the sex. And what we've learned, and even what we started to see during that period of time, is that it wasn't about the sexual intimacy. It was about what happens when both husband and wife prioritize the marriage, all aspects of the marriage. Mm-hmm. And start to see one another, not just as somebody that, that they're partnered with, like, oh, you take care of that task, you take care of that task, but as someone that they're constantly building closeness and connection with, which is really the true definition of intimacy, to create an extraordinary marriage.
Yeah.
I mean, wow. I mean, I can imagine when you're introducing it to your small group, it's, let me back up a little bit because I want to bring something up to you guys. It's interesting that you talk about 27 years because my wife and I have been together 28. It's interesting that you talk about leading a small group because when our boys were little, we led a small group in our home as well. And I think we had 5 couples that were in our home. We had a babysitter that came over. She took all the kids out back, and we met every single week. And it was a lot of work because I had a full-time job. My wife had a full-time job. I was a coach for my boys on their different teams. I mean, we had a lot going. Plus I was going to night school. We had a lot going on. And yet we still led this small group. And what was cool was that not only did we enjoy the connection that we had with everybody that was coming over on that Sunday afternoon, it was like a 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock afternoon, but we also got to enjoy the connection that my wife and I shared together during that time as well. And in addition to that, we witnessed 3 different couples in our marriage group, 3 different couples over the course of about 2.5 to 3 years that we ran that group. They branched off and started their own marriage groups and had their own thing going. So the church was really happy that we did that. And so anyways, that's just kind of a little sidebar, but it's interesting. You guys a lot in common with that kind of stuff. So that's awesome. But bringing this up to your small group saying, hey, we're going to talk about sex. I'm sure you had to have some hesitation or some resistance a little bit from them.
You know what? I think they were sort of like, okay, But the way we presented it,
Mm-hmm.
everybody was like, you know what? We do need to talk about this. And when we shared what we were going to do, like with the 60-day sex challenge, it was really interesting because it was more like, hey, you guys, you're along for the ride, your accountability. We're not asking you to do this in your own lives, but we're going to go through Intimacy Ignited, which is based on the Song of Solomon. And that's what we're just going to dive into together. And we're going to have these open and honest conversations with one another. And Alisa and I are along for this journey just as you guys are. This isn't the Tony and Alisa you see now, who's, we've written 11 books and, have that podcast and all these other things we've done. We're here with you, man. We just want to come alongside you and see you have the marriage you desire at that point in time. And it was really fun. I mean, I think there was some shifting in the seats and stuff, you know what I mean? More like this is a little awkward.
Yeah.
But once we got going, I mean, they were amazing, and there are still couples from that group that we are still dear friends with. And they've been a blessing in our lives.
All these years later, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's probably some self-discovery there from everybody that, there are probably moments where they were just like, oh, you know what? This isn't going right, or this needs to change, or this is how we should be operating as far as a couple goes. So that's awesome that you guys did that. I think when I coach a lot of dads on being a dad, right? And one of the things that I talk about is about the marriage structure and how as I had said earlier, I'm a firm believer in the couple, the husband and the wife, being the ultimate foundation to raising successful kids or raising healthy kids. And if there's a little crack in that foundation of the marriage, it not only affects the couple, but it also affects things outside the home as well. So you have relationships outside the home, whether you're a business owner or work in corporate America, it'll affect your kids. And then because it affects your kids, it affects them outside of the home. I mean, there's a lot of different impacts that it can have when you have these little cracks. And what eventually ends up happening is that the husband and the wife are so busy running when they're raising these kids that they lose the connection to each other, right? And they start to drift apart. And then couples wonder, like they say, divorce, a lot of times divorce is caused a lot of times by, financial stress. Well, that's not necessarily true. What happens is the couples grow so far apart that by the time the kids grow and leave the house, now they're looking at the other person and going, who are you?
Yep.
Right.
And essentially they've fallen out of love. Now they're, like you guys had talked about, now they're roommates, right? And they don't know each other anymore. And that is what happens to couples when they divorce. Yes, they're going to have problems. Everybody's got those little problems, whether it's financial, all those health reasons, whatever those things may be. But when you don't know your partner anymore because you've been so busy paying attention to other things, naturally you're going to separate. Naturally, that's just going to happen. That's just what happens. And so it's important for us as husband and wives, right? It's important for us to continue to work on that relationship. I talk to my dads and I say, listen, number one, you need to focus on yourself. Self-care is super important, because if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else around you. Number two is not your kids. It is not. Number two is your spouse. That's number two. You, then your spouse, then your kids. And it's like that old saying, when you get on the airplane, you put your, if something happens, you put the mask on for yourself first and then your kids, right? So for you guys, I mean, that's what you guys talk about, right? It's that whole dynamic of taking care of your relationship, so that way when you get further down the road, nothing does happen, because you guys already have that connection and still have it today.
Right. And that's so spot on with where we are, Bryan. Our best-selling book is called The 6 Pillars of Intimacy, The Secret to an Extraordinary Marriage. As Alisa said, intimacy is closeness and connection. Our society has hijacked that word to only mean sex, and it's not. Right. And so within the book and what we've learned over the years in our own marriage and with the one family, there are 6 pillars. And we talk about each of them, going, okay, how are you personally and with your spouse, how are you strengthening those pillars so you have the extraordinary marriage you desire? Now, it doesn't mean that you don't pay attention to your children. It doesn't mean you don't pay attention to other family members or your job or your business or anything like that. But there needs to be this importance, like you said, on the marriage. because this has to weather everything so that our children, can feel secure. And our children have seen Alisa and I go through tough times, arguments, things of that nature, but they always knew we had each other's back and we were there for one another. And we would talk to them about these things. Finances, we talked to them. Spiritual intimacy, we talked to them. Emotional intimacy, we would bring these things up to them and let them know that, hey, you may see us like this, and yet we're not going anywhere. It's part of the journey we are on as a married couple. We want you to see this, but we're not going to give up on one another. So we totally talk. That's what we talk about all the time. People will be like, hey, talk about parenting and this. And we're like, no, we're not parenting, folks. We're about the marriage. The foundation is the two of you. And from there, you guys can learn from others to strengthen those areas in your life.
Yeah. So, right. I mean, exactly. I think about just my relationship with my wife, and let me say this. If there are couples out there, if there's a parent out there, whether you're dad or mom right now, and you're watching this episode and going, my marriage is perfect, I don't know what these guys are talking about, I'm going to tell you right now, you're lying. You're absolutely lying, because everybody has issues. Everybody's got little, things that go on. They do. My wife and I do. And you know what? We still love each other, and we still do everything we can possible to make sure our marriage is strong and healthy. And even being married 28 years, being together, even longer than that, as far as our dating goes, we still have to work on that every single day. It's like, going to the gym. You can't just go to the gym for 1 week and then expect that you're going to stay in shape for the rest of your life. It just doesn't happen. And so you have to continue to work on it. And my wife, I talk about it a lot because I think it's super important, but my wife and I have a marriage coach. We go see our marriage coach every other month. We go and see her. We spend an hour and a half with her every other month. And she's a licensed marriage therapist, but we call her our coach. Our boys know that her name's Karen. Our boys know that we go see Karen, and they know what we're going for. We go so we don't have issues. And that's important to us. We also do the thing that, I'm sure you guys talk about a lot, dating each other. We date each other constantly. We're making sure that we're taking each other out on these little dates, these special times where it's just the two of us. Last weekend, we went to, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank on the concert. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. All right. Anyways,
It'll come back. The thing is that you
Kane
did
Brown, Kane Brown. That's what I was going to say. Kane Brown, country singer, Kane Brown. But we go to these things, and we enjoy these things together. And it's something that we know requires work. And for us, one of the things that we do struggle with, not constantly, but we still struggle with regularly, is our communication, because we all have our moments, right? We all have our times in the days where we're not in that good space right now to communicate. So what happens is we have these little quirks or these little issues that come up, and it almost causes like a I guess a rift in the ocean, right? It's like a wave, right? So we have to make sure that we're constantly working on those communication skills. I want to ask you guys though, because you guys talking about, you've gone through various things in your life that have really been challenging. How is the communication with you guys, and what advice would you give other married couples about communication, because it's important?
So I would say we're still a work in progress. Ages and stages is a phrase I often use in my own coaching. Just talking about like different ages and stages, you run into different things, right? We just moved cross country. That's uprooting after 20 years, leaving our oldest in San Diego while we moved to Florida. Like there were a lot of stressors, right? And when you're under high stress, what happens to your communication? For most couples, to your point, it gets a little wavy. Right. And so we are still working through. I think one of the things that we have really developed over the years is that it's not about not having fights. It's not about not having those communication challenges. It's about figuring out for the two of you, what helps the two of you recover the fastest. Right. For Tony and I, one of our big strategies in San Diego was that we would go on walk and talks, get out, get the body moving, and have conversations, whether it was something really positive, whether it was something we were struggling with, whatever that was. Change the orientation so it wasn't this more adversarial, like, let me look into your eyes and, as Tony says, peer into my soul. But change it to the reminder that we're on the same team.
Yeah, we're shoulder to shoulder.
When you're shoulder to shoulder in your movement, and I tell wives all the time, I'm like, ladies, your husbands need to move when they're having a conversation with you. Do not force them to just sit there and not be moving. I mean, Tony right now, I know you guys can't see him, but his hands, he's always got a pen in his hands when we're doing an interview because it just keeps him in movement.
Yeah.
And it's something to remember because and you said earlier, Bryan, we need to adopt as married spouses, we need to adopt this attitude that we are every day improving, every day working on our marriage, that it's not just, whatever we said at the altar with the I do's, the fancy dress and the cake, but rather it's this daily practice of engaging and being present and investing in through effort in the marriage.
Yeah. And I would say we call this emotional intimacy and the 6 pillars of intimacy, your verbal and nonverbal communication. And it's probably one of the top topics that we talk about on our podcast. Constantly putting in reminders and how are we doing it and how are we shifting or how are we talking about topics that need to be talked about and yet we're not. And so we try to bring it up for couples to be able to go, well, if Tony and Alisa can talk about it, then what if we listen to it and we talk about it and engage folks? So because it's tough to talk about some of these topics that you maybe, you can be 50 years old and still holding on to things that your mom or dad told you when you were 8, 9, or 10. And we need to break those things off. And so one of the things I would say for folks too is find a dedicated time once a week. It could be with a walk and talk. It could be a drive. It could be a coffee break, whatever. Find 30 minutes a week. That's it. Like, I'm not telling you to find 40 hours. I'm just saying find 30 minutes. And the reason I say that is Alisa and I have been behind our microphones now for almost 15 years. And typically our episodes are about 30 minutes. And that is one thing that we have done consistently for 15 years through ups and downs. And I will say it has held us together because we get behind those microphones and there are times when we have to have a conversation that we haven't had, but we get behind that microphone and we can have that conversation. Just yesterday, we were recording around initiating foreplay. And it was just this awesome conversation that Alisa and I had. And it was needed. And it's 30 minutes. So just put that on your calendar and make it a priority. Make your marriage a priority.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely, you just said it that right there. Put it on your calendar. It's like you go to the doctor, you're going to put it on the schedule, right? You got to take the car in for maintenance. It's on the schedule. You have an appointment at work. It's on the schedule, but talking to my spouse is not on my schedule, or hanging out with my kids is not on my schedule. Those things are just as important, if not more important, right? So yeah, absolutely scheduling a time. And the other thing that I like to tell, especially dads, because you're right, we do have a hard time sitting still, right? We can't just sit, like I'm very animated when I'm talking. My hands are constantly going, right? So we can't just sit still. But one of the things that we've learned, my wife and I have learned over time when it comes to communicating, especially if we have something that's on our mind that we really need to express or get across to the other person, and it may not be a good thing to talk about, is we ask permission. And that's one thing that husbands don't understand. Wives can do that and they can understand that, but we ask permission. Hey, do you have time for us to chat? I want to talk with you about something. When's a good time for us to do that? And then allow that other person to respond. The other thing I like to say is that when it comes to communication for a husband and a wife, wives, if your husband is not ready to talk about it right now, don't force him to sit down and talk about it right now, because it's not going to go well. And husbands, when you say, honey, I need a break. I need to table this for right now. Let's come back to it. Husbands, you need to make sure you come back to it, because the wife is not going to forget and she's going to want to talk to you about it. So you guys, I mean, I'm sure you agree. Wives, you need to allow your husband the space when he says he needs a space. If he's available to talk, great. But a lot of times husbands are going to be like, you know what? I'm not in a good headspace right now. I need to table this. Let's come back to it. Great. The wife would say, that's fine with me. What are we looking at? Are we looking at an hour? Are we looking at a day? Are we looking at a couple days? What do you need? Because I will, we can do that. And then the husband answers, and then you have to follow through with it. So you got to put it on your schedule. My wife and I talk about our weekly schedule every single Sunday evening. Now we're usually watching TV, hanging out, relaxing, right? But we talk about, okay, what do you got going on this week? What do you got going on this week? And we make sure it's on the schedule so we don't miss anything, right? The other thing is you guys talked about it, sitting in the car and going for a drive. When we had the pandemic, My wife and I couldn't go anywhere, right? She's a type 1 diabetic. She didn't want to go outside and be in public or anything like that. So what we would do is we would drive, and typically didn't go long distances. We just drove around Southern California, right? So maybe even as far down as maybe like La Jolla, all those areas, and then up towards Santa Barbara. And we would just drive, and it would take us 3-4 hours of just driving. We didn't
Wow.
stop. We didn't get out of the car. We didn't walk. We just drove. And it allowed us to talk. It allowed us to communicate and just share and have fun and enjoy each other's company. Those are the kinds of things you have to work into your marriage.
Yep.
And let me talk about 2 more examples. Actually, I think I have it right here. I think I brought it. Yeah. This book here. Now, this is a different book that we're reading, Love and Respect, right? And this book, what's cool about this book, my wife and I adapted this several months ago, but we every few nights we'll read a chapter in that book together. And we read it, like she has her copy, I have my copy. We silently read, like we'll read through a chapter. And then when we're done, then we sit down for about a half an hour and we talk about that chapter and what we learned from it, what we could use from it, what could we, not really use from it, those kinds of things. And it allows us to develop communication skills with each other about marriage.
Yeah.
So, I mean, things like that are so simple to do. They take work, right? I mean, they take work. And you guys travel around the country teaching people, hey, marriage is about work, but when you do it, you can enjoy it and it can be fun.
Yeah, the 2 things we say most often for folks, because work in marriage sometimes feels like oil and water.
Right.
People are like, I don't want to have to
wanna
work at this. And I get it. And yet at the same time, anything that you want to be great or excellent, you're going to have to put effort into it. You're going to have to work at it in some way, shape, or form. What we've said for so long is be intentional about your marriage or a specific pillar of intimacy in your marriage, and then take action. And so taking action can look very different for all of us in different ways. And so what we're really saying there is you're going to have to put your hand to the plow, right? You're going to have to sow some seeds. You're going to have to get out there. But that for a lot of our couples really helps them to go, okay, like you said, you guys pick up a book, you're reading it. That book in particular, I would probably put that into like the spiritual intimacy pillar and go, okay, we're going to be intentional. How are we going to be intentional? We're going to pick up this book and we're going to read a chapter a night. Great. Or once a week or whatever that is. And then we're going to take action. Our action step is after we read it, we're going to just discuss it with each other for a little bit. And that I think helps a lot of people to go, oh, okay, I can be intentional in my, my spiritual intimacy. How are we going to do that? Boom. Now we need to practice it. As you said in the beginning, like you don't go to the gym for a week and you have gains. You got to consistently go and be committed to that process.
Yeah. And you guys travel, so you guys talk around the country to churches, organizations, things like that. And what's the biggest takeaway for you guys? Because you guys are the ones giving the lesson or the talk or trying to educate other people. But I'm sure, like me, I've done a podcast for parents for many years now, and I still learn stuff, and I'm still growing from just doing the podcast. So what about you guys? What have you guys learned from your own marriage through all the experiences that you've had?
I think, there are a couple of things. One is because we get to see marriages across the country. I'm super excited about how many couples out there are fired up about marriage and about creating their own extraordinary marriage. I think the narrative in society, the narrative in media is, relationships are disposable and just, when it doesn't make you happy, go on to the next thing. And I think that's a constant reinforcement for Tony and I. We see it in the One Family. We see it in our audience. We see it when we're live with them. We hear the breakthrough stories. There are stories of transformation on every episode that we do. We call them our hugs. And seeing other people's transformation and the intentionality is a constant reminder of the intentionality that we need to bring into our own marriage. That when we start to get complacent, it's going, wait a minute, there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people out there that listen to the podcast, that engage with us on social, that do all of these things, and they're taking action in their marriage. What are we doing to take action? And how can we borrow, and I think that's the beautiful thing about live events, about speaking, about writing books. When you have that interaction with your audience and you see their enthusiasm, it reminds you, why are we so fired up for this? Like, our mission, Bryan, is we wake up every day with one mission, and that is to impact one marriage that day. We don't know whose it is. We don't know throughout the day if we've done it. We just keep doing it. That's what our team knows. That's what we do. And so when we see those couples out there and we get the opportunity to hear their stories, they're impacting us and keeping that mission fired up, so that every day we choose. And we're not perfect. We tell our audience all the time, we are not perfect. There are definitely days when we have to remind one another that we're choosing marriage, that we're choosing each other. But it's that we practice what we preach. How can we be intentional and take action ourselves?
Yeah. And for me, I love it when we're at events, and I love my husbands who come in with like a scowl on their face, arms crossed.
I don't want to be
like,
here.
I don't want to be here. Why am I here? And, we're going through the sessions and we're doing some stuff, and all of a sudden you can see that person like get a little smile, maybe get a little jovial, start laughing a little bit. The arms get uncrossed. And then at the end, you'll see him, or he'll come up to me and just be like, that really touched me. That was really what I needed to hear today. I need, and I'm gonna get your book, and I'm gonna start listening to you guys, because we have many more greater days ahead of us than we do behind us. But I need to be intentional, and I need to take action. So for me, I love seeing my husbands and just going, look at guys, I'm here for you. I want to champion you, but you got to do it, man. You got to get bold. You got to rise up and get that strength back inside of you.
Yeah. Put the ego aside, let the guard down a little bit, and enjoy yourself. I mean, it's like my wife and I, when we see our marriage coaches, can you imagine like the number of guys that I say, hey, you know how healthy it is to actually go see a therapist? Maybe that's something you should do, to go to talk to somebody, whether it's just you privately, or maybe it's you and your spouse together. Go talk to some, that's so like, okay, then why are you complaining? Like, don't complain then. You might as well get out of the marriage if you're not willing to work on it. I mean, what the heck are you doing? Right. So go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I think, for a lot of men, that's what they need. They need a coach, because, and I've used this phrasing with my own coaching clients, because I actually do coach quite a few husbands in marriage, in the marriage coaching that I do. And I'm like, look, I'm just calling the plays. You're familiar with football. On the sideline, there's the coach. He's calling the plays. He's saying, go try this. Does it work perfectly every time? No. Interceptions happen, fumbles happen, people get sacked. That's okay. But do you have somebody else in your corner that's saying, this isn't all on your shoulders to figure it out?
Right.
But rather, I can see more than you can see. I can see this from different perspectives. I can see what the opposing team is doing. Not that your wife is the opposing team, but for the sake of the analogy, we're going to use it. I can see what she's doing. I can see, and then I can call the plays to help us advance the ball, to help us do that. And so that's where I think for a lot of men, this idea of coaching, if they can put their egos aside, actually becomes a superpower for them. And I wanted to mention this to you, Bryan. I love that your boys know about Karen, because there is such a sense of stability for our children as they become adults, when they know that mom and dad are still investing in the marriage, that they're not just like, oh, we've graduated and now we're just going to keep our fingers crossed and hope they just, grin and bear it for the next 30 years. But instead, Karen is such a gift, not just to the two of you, but also to your sons.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. It was important for it. My wife was actually hesitant about letting them know, years ago when we started to see Karen, she was very hesitant about letting them know, because she didn't want to scare them. She didn't want them to worry. And I said, no, I actually encouraged my wife. I said, no, we need to let them know. We don't have to tell them that, she's a licensed marriage therapist and we're going to a therapist. We just call her our marriage coach, because that's what she's doing. She's coaching us. And so I said, I think if we tell them that, that's a healthy way of putting it into perspective for them to say, hey, you know what? My boys played basketball. My younger son played college basketball. My boys played sports their whole lives, and they go to their coach, right? They have a coach that's telling them, like you use the analogy there in football, which I'm very proud. You actually knew some interceptions and all those kinds of things.
Our son played football.
Our son.
I'm a huge football fan. That is not just like
he was a D lineman. He was a nose tackle. So we seen him play football since 5th grade. And,
Yeah, I
and
spent a
Alisa and
lot
I
of
are
years.
huge, like you talk about like recreational intimacy, which is like your dates, your activities, what do you do for fun? Alisa and I are huge college football fans. Like,
All right. So
we
So
love
I could talk
college
the lingo
football.
there.
you're enjoying this moment because it's started
It's a
up.
good thing. It's a good start of the season. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's, it was important for us to, I told my wife, it's like, look at they're old enough that they'll understand it. They're old enough that they'll appreciate it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And I brag about it all the time because I'm proud of it. Now, yeah, I'm a guy, and yeah, it was hard in the beginning for me to open up to a marriage therapist. It was hard for me to open up, but guess what I discovered? Something that you guys alluded to earlier. Things that happened in my past when I was a child growing up that have now translated into my life as an adult, as a dad, and as a husband. And I'm discovering over the years, I'm starting to discover things, and I'm like, that's why I act like that, or that's why I react that way, or that's why this happened. That's exactly how I was raised this way. So little things like that will help you discover. That's what, therapists are good at that. They can really pull those things out of you and help you to work on those things. And it could be related to your marriage. It could help could just make that little tweak. You take that screwdriver and just tweak just the screw just a little bit. And guess what? Everything lines up and it starts to work out. And so you can't be so just chip on the block, kind of like, you know what, I'm not doing this. I don't have time for this. I'd rather sit and watch college football. So I'm not doing it. Guess what? Oh, you want to hear something else? And I know you guys are going to agree with this. Men, I'm going to tell you right now, you know what your wives think is freaking super sexy is if you really open up and enjoy those moments where you go to either where it's a marriage coach or you're opening up to her and you're really sharing how you're feeling. They love it. Trust me, they love it.
Yeah.
Well, there's that sense of emotional intimacy of seeing the vulnerability and of getting to know you, not just as husband, but also as, who are you inside?
Right.
And so that becomes, we all have this desire to be known, to be seen, to be heard. And when you allow somebody else to do that with you, men, it changes the dynamic immensely in the marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys, this has been fun. I feel like we could talk about this stuff for hours because it is important. I mean, we really could. And the fact that you guys have been doing it for so long on your podcast. And that's why, even though this is a parenting podcast, I've had other couples that talk, that are basically marriage coaches that talk to other married couples. I've had them on my show before. And I think this is, like I said, this is really important when it comes to especially raising kids, is the foundation of the husband and the wife together as one. So thank you guys for the work that you guys are doing. You're making an impact not only in your own lives, but also in the lives of others. And like you guys said, if you can just help one couple a day, then you've done your job. I've kind of had the same kind of thing where if I can just help one dad before I go meet my Heavenly Father and he says, "What did you do?" And I can say, "Look, and I helped him and I helped him and I helped him and I did it because of you." He's going to say, "Great job," right? That's what I look forward to, is saying, I have no regrets. And I'm sure you guys feel the same way. For my listeners viewers, want to look you up and learn a little bit more about you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah. Perfect place is oneextraordinarymarriage.com. And that's ONE extraordinarymarriage.com. You learn everything about us. You can learn about the podcast, where we're speaking, our books, everything is there for you.
Awesome. You guys, you know what? I appreciate you guys being on. I have to be honest, I'm looking forward to continuing this friendship, getting to know you guys better. And maybe, if we ever make our way out to Florida, we'll have to break some bread together. And if you guys are ever back here in Southern California, make sure you guys hit me up. But really appreciate you guys being on. Thank you again. And listen, my viewers, listeners, make sure you guys go check them out. One Extraordinary Marriage. Trust me, they're very responsive on Instagram. You can email them. You can check out their podcasts, all those sorts of things. You have a marriage question, you can ask them that too. They'll respond to you. Unless you have a very weird marriage question, they're not going to respond to that. But if you have a serious marriage question and you need some help or some guidance, please respond, reach out to them, and they'll do their best to help you. Subscribe to their podcast. Make sure you guys do that so you guys are not missing any of the important information that they share each and every week. And as always, if you're not yet subscribed to my show, please make sure you do that so you don't miss any of the awesome guests that I have on each and every week. And as always, I look forward to seeing you all in the next episode of Dad Up. Another amazing episode in the books. So much was shared, and I'm truly grateful my guest was able to pour into you to help you elevate your dad game and really dad up. Make sure you bang that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And while you're here, please don't forget to leave me a rating and a review. I always appreciate the feedback. And one last thing, don't forget, your role as a dad is one of the most important roles you have. So if you need a little help or have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website at daduptribe.com or at my Instagram page at Dad Up Podcast. Until next time, everyone, Dad Up.